Don't be that guy that works out for 6 months, doesn't know how to train or eat properly, has piss poor results, and then hops on gear because he thinks he's found a magic pill, realizes that, oh, sticking myself in the ass with a needle every day isn't fun, quits with nothing to show for it but a fucked up endocrine system. Hey guys, today in this video I'm going to talk about some key considerations that you need to take into account before you decide to use steroids. You may be a natural now who's considering using steroids for the first time. This video is just going to cover things that you may not have thought about so that you can make a more informed decision moving forward. I'll also talk about groups of people who I believe are not good candidates for steroid use and explain why. To start off, I'll say that using steroids is a very serious decision that should not be taken lightly at all. They can have a huge impact on the rest of your life, and you must be willing to accept the trade-offs and that there's no such thing as a biological free lunch. First and foremost, the possibility of destroying your endocrine system is very real, which may result in you being dependent on testosterone injections for the rest of your life. This is because exogenous testosterone, which means testosterone taken outside of the body, shuts down your HTPA, or your hypothalamus pituitary axis, which is your body's own regulatory system for producing sex hormones. Now, I will say that the vast majority of people recover after one or even multiple cycles. They rarely return to the baseline hormonal profile that they had previous to PED use. It always tends to be a little bit lower. Obviously, the more cycles you do and the longer you stay on increases the likelihood of TRT dependency in the future. There's also other factors involved in the recovery process, like age, the length of exposure to exogenous androgens, general health, individual genetics. These all play a role in how an individual will recover from steroid use. Another point on that, because some of you might be like, well, I'll go on TRT anyway when I'm like 35. If you live in the UK, it's actually pretty tough to get a testosterone prescription, and general health practitioners, with exceptions, are pretty clueless when it comes to hormones. I've heard of people being prescribed absolutely ridiculous protocols, like 200 milligrams of testosterone in one injection once per month of testosterone enanthate, which has a 4-day half-life. So these guys are on a horrendous hormonal roller coaster where they might feel good for the first 2 weeks, and then the last 2 weeks before the shot, their hormones are in the gutter and crashed and they feel like absolute shit. There's no consistency in the levels because they're not taking it frequently enough. So it's stupid shit like that that just makes you shake your head. It's the peaks and valleys in hormone levels that are responsible for a lot of the side effects, including acne, mood swings, irritation, sleeping disruptions, libido being up and down because aromatase is all over the place with estrogen. It's just a shit show. I know in the US a lot of guys have an easier time getting TRT because there's so many clinics. I'm not sure what it's like in the rest of the world or Europe, but here in the UK, it's definitely not easy. So a lot of you will be like, oh, well, I just won't bother with a prescription and I'll just go underground. And a point on that is that traveling becomes a pain in the ass because you'll either have to risk taking your gear abroad, which I definitely do not recommend, or limiting your travels to 2 weeks because you're basically on a hormonal timer where you've got 2 weeks before your hormones pretty much crash. So that's the first point. Secondly, there's a potential for loss of fertility. And the more cycles you do and the longer you stay on, the greater the risk increases. And I will say that while complete loss of fertility is actually quite rare, it's still a risk, especially if you're using highly suppressive compounds like 19-NORs, such as trenbolone and nandrolone, which the metabolites stick around for months and months on end, causing suppression, even when you come off. You can mitigate some of the risk to fertility by taking HCG while you're on cycle. I've got a video all about HCG on my channel, so check that out. This will help prevent complete shutdown and atrophy of the testes. Thirdly, you've got the cost of maintaining an enhanced physique. Although steroids themselves are actually quite cheap, at least here in the UK, The supporting supplements and blood work required in order to do it safely adds up to be quite a bit, and a basic 16-week cycle could end up costing you over £400, which is like $500. So it's important that you're financially capable of supporting this lifestyle. And finally, and people in this space can deny it as much as they want, but PEDs generally lower your lifespan. I'm willing to bet if you had two identical clones, one of them stayed natural and one of them was blasted with super physiological amounts of androgens, the one being blasted with super physiological amount of androgens would have a shorter lifespan than the one that had stayed natural. This is because over time they make your heart and organs work harder. By how much they lower your lifespan is up for debate, but I'm willing to bet that guys like Rich Piana, Boston Lloyd, and Dallas McCarver would be here today if they'd never touched a PED in their life. You could argue with Dallas that there was a genetic predisposition anyway, but I don't think it would have amounted to anything in that short of a time span had he stayed natural. Maybe he would have run into issues down the road if he stayed natural, but who knows? I'm still willing to bet that he would have been able to live a long life. So with that one in particular, I've got no doubt that PED use exacerbated his genetic predispositions to the point of his unfortunate passing. So if you have a family history of high blood pressure, cardiac issues, and liver and kidney problems in particular, then I would proceed with extreme caution. Now, of course, these guys took it to the extreme. Certainly Boston Lloyd did, and I'm almost certain that Rich Piana and Dallas McCarver did. Dallas was a competitive bodybuilder who was probably running grams and grams of gear. And I think when they did the autopsy, his heart was 3 times the size of a normal heart, which is absolutely crazy if you think about it. That's the extent of the damage that PEDs can cause. Now, the average PED user generally takes a much more conservative approach when it comes to dosing and timing and how long they stay on, but it's still a risk and you're still doing damage. I suppose on the other hand, you could argue that a shorter life where you feel good, are physically strong, confident, emotionally resilient, driven, motivated due to the super physiological amount of androgens is what some people might choose anyway, and that's fine, but that's their choice. But they have to be willing to accept that there's a trade-off. As I said earlier, there's no such thing as a biological free lunch, and you will be paying the price in one way or another. And you can generally expect that your lifespan will be cut short. By how much shorter is a good question. Maybe you would die at 72 as opposed to 75 if you'd used PEDs as opposed to staying natural. Sure, you can minimize the risks and do it as safely as possible, but you will pay the price in one way or another. All right, so I want to talk about people who I believe are not good candidates for steroid use and go into why. Firstly is guys that are overweight. Being overweight is the root cause of many chronic diseases and illnesses anyway, and throw in super physiological amounts of androgens and hormones on top of that. It's like throwing petrol on a fire. The more body fat you have, the harder your organs have to work anyway, and likely the higher blood pressure you're going to have. So why put additional stress on it? And to me, being overweight screams lack of discipline and poor impulse control around diet. And I think diet in particular is something that you should be on top of if you decide to go the PED route. I'd go as far to say that if you're not disciplined enough to get yourself into reasonable shape naturally, and by reasonable shape, I mean less than 12% body fat, then you have no business touching PEDs, end of. Higher body fat will also make you convert testosterone into estrogen at higher rates. And the higher your estrogen level is, the more water you're going to retain. And the more water you retain, the higher your blood pressure is going to go up. So if you're overweight, I would say hold it off for now. Get yourself into shape first and then come back and consider it. There's no rush. Okay, the second group of people is guys under the age of 25. This is a bit of a hot take, And I personally know many people and have friends that do use steroids and are under the age of 25. My reasoning behind this is because when you're younger, you're more likely to make erratic and emotional decisions and are more likely to be influenced by idiots online that promote reckless steroid use as well as other stupid shit. And I know there's a lot of emotionally mature guys under the age of 25, but the cutoff has to be somewhere, so here it is. There's also evidence to suggest that your brain doesn't stop developing until 25. So if you've got a developing brain and you're adding in super physiological amounts of androgens, it's bound to alter development in some way. To what extent, who knows? It's probably highly dependent on genetics, the compounds you use, the exposure. It's probably very highly individualistic, but I would err on the side of caution and just wait it out. Wait till you're over 25. And then if you still want to do it, go ahead and do it. Another thing on the point of age, I think there's something to be said about the saying of paying your dues. If you've ever got really, really interested in something to the point where you're doing tons of research and it's all you can think about, and then a few months later, you've completely moved on and forgotten about it. This is what you don't want to happen with fitness. Don't let it become just a phase. Make it a lifestyle. You don't want to be like, oh, I got into fitness for a while. It was kind of cool, but I'm past that now. Like, what the fuck is that? There's no getting past fitness. It should be a part of your lifestyle forever. You know, don't be that guy that works out for 6 months, doesn't know how to train or eat properly, has piss poor results, and then hops on gear because he thinks he's found a magic pill, realizes that, oh, sticking myself in the ass with a needle every day isn't fun, quits with nothing to show for it but a fucked up endocrine system. Don't be that guy. I think there's phases of fitness that you go through as you age. I think when you're young, you should focus on size and strength, and then you should move into more endurance-based mobility work as you get older. At minimum, I think you should have trained at least 3 years naturally to make sure that pursuing fitness and physique development on a serious level enough to warrant PED use is something that you actually enjoy and want to do. So why 3 years? This is actually for 3 reasons. Number one, this is so you can build a solid foundation of size and strength. If you hop on gear day one in the gym and then 6 months later you get bored of sticking a needle in your ass, you're going to come off and you've got nothing to show for it because there wasn't a base there. It's like building a house on sand. There's no foundation. You could argue with gear that you could probably make like 2 years worth of natural gains in 6 months. But when you come off, you're just going to lose it because there was no foundation there to begin with. Second reason is that I think 3 years is a good amount of time to learn how to effectively overload properly, deload properly, learn which exercises and movements are the best for you and your individual biomechanics, and probably most importantly, to learn how to eat and diet properly. Yeah, you could probably learn that in under 3 years, but you need a significant amount of time to be able to apply it to yourself. Third reason is that 3 years, if you're eating and training right, will give you, I would probably say 60 to 80% of your natural gains that you're ever going to get. After that, there's a big drop off in terms of the speed of progress. You've got dudes like Jeff Nippard who claim to be natural. Personally, I think he is, but who knows, right? Anyway, he looks great, but he's been training for 10 years, over 10 years. How much muscle is he really adding every year at this point? It's probably 2 or 3 pounds max, and that's if he does everything right. And to me personally, that's not really worth the time and effort investment. It's too much of an investment for too little return, but that's a personal call you're going to have to make. So they're the 3 reasons why I think you should train for at least 3 years naturally. All right, the last group of people, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, is people with a history of congenital and genetic heart issues, high blood pressure issues, as well as people with severe mood and emotional disorders, such as chronic anxiety, psychopathy, things like that. This one should be kind of obvious, but any predispositions you have, either physically like a heart defect, or even personality traits like aggression. If you're a naturally aggressive person with anger issues, do you really want to be running something like Tren? Probably not, right? It's either going to land you in jail or worse. All of these things can be exacerbated and exaggerated with PED use. So I'd highly recommend that those people stay away, because it may make those issues worse and it might not end well for them. I hope this has given you some insight and food for thought if you've been considering using steroids. It's a big decision and not one that should be taken lightly. They can have serious consequences if not used properly and respected. If you've got any questions or topics you want me to cover, drop them in the comments. Or if you think I'm missing something or disagree, let me know why, because at the end of the day, this is just my take. You can do what you want. Aside from that, thanks for watching. Check out my blog, enhancedplayer.com, and I'll see you next time.